I have been meaning to talk about movies for a long time now, so I'm just gonna do it, and I'm gonna start with this one because I have two copies of it.
I'm cutting it.
Butchery, sadism, murder.
A wave of depraved and corrupt horror video.
Confusing fiction with reality.
So for a little background on me, while I love film as a whole, horror is definitely my favorite genre. But as a young 20-something, I can't deny that for most of my life, the horror movies that have come out just don't take advantage of the genre and have overall been really loud, tumultuous, visually chaotic messes. I feel like the expectation for horror movies to be scary has kind of shaped what scary is. Jump scares, long mouth ghosts, and nudity, I guess, is something that's scary now for some reason. For me, there's not, like, something specific that you can put in a movie to make it scary. But if your movie has an idea that really sticks with me and lingers long after the movie's done, that's something that's scary to me. Because if I'm not thinking about it without being reminded of it, I can't really feel myself being scared of it. And this movie, Censor, not only does that, but that idea is at the heart of its story. Censor is a 2021 horror film from Welsh director Prano Bailey-Bond. It's her first feature as well, being an expanded version of her short film Nasty from 2015. I saw it and it was nothing too special. A kid wakes up one morning and finds a VHS tape and his mom's like, "Don't watch that! Have you seen your dad?" And then he watches the VHS tape, and then his dad's in the VHS tape as a zombie, and that's really all it is. It's a fun execution of style as a director, but that's really all it serves. But this movie is definitely an expanded version of it, really leaning into the time period that it's supposed to take place in, being the early 1980s in the UK, during the height of a moral panic around video nasties. Which were mostly horror movies that some people believed to be so obscene that they went against the Obscene Publications Act of 1959 and deemed that they should be banned, and many of which were, a total of 72. To try to counteract this, there was a huge push for censoring media and cutting out the really graphic things that specifically upset these people. And it really got to the point where movies were just being gutted of a lot of the content that was within them, whether it was just for shock value or not. And that's kind of an inherent issue, because if this material is so dangerous that it needs to be kept away from people, what's protecting the people that are monitoring this for others? I mean, they're being exposed to this stuff all the time. And that's kind of the hypocrisy that gets called out in the movie, although that's not the real heart of it. It's the hypocrisy that did lead to it being eventually changed in favor for a more appropriate rating system, which still isn't perfect, but is far better than movies just being completely changed from the director's original intent, whether there is a lot of artistry behind it or not.
You know, if someone did take it, then they're still out there.
You've never been clear on exactly what you remember.
You'd be surprised what the human brain can edit out when it can't handle the truth.
Someone's losing the plot.
So if the title didn't make it obvious, the movie follows one of these film censors, Enid, who watches a movie that reminds her of her fractured, repressed memories of her and her sister in the woods before she disappeared. Quick side note, the movie she sees is actually a little bit of a joke. It's called Don't Go in the Church, which is a cabin in the woods type movie, but there are two actual video nasties called Don't Go in the Woods and Don't Go in the House, so she just kind of completed the trilogy in a fake movie and put it in this one, which is fun. We love to see that. Anyways, seeing this movie, it inspires her investigation into who made it, what happened to her sister, and why does anybody know about this? During her investigation, obviously, things get in the way. It's a movie. I mean, her parents aren't very supportive. They just want to sign a death certificate and move on for the thing. No one around her seems to be supportive of her, and the moral panic is both pointing the finger at her for crimes going on in the news, and simultaneously she's having trouble finding information on the director she's helped to suppress.
Wanted a woman's eye on his film.
I want to take a second and talk about runtime. This movie sits at a short and sweet 84 minutes, which is a godsend because way too many movies are trying to be 2+ hours or even 2.5+ hours. Probably because of streaming and retention and all that. It's not something I really want to get into, but this movie really does not waste your time and keeps everything in the interest of the forward-moving narrative, all while being stylish and interesting. It can be pretty easily seen as style over substance, but it's more just how well these things all blend together into a cohesive story. That's not to say that this movie also doesn't have a lot to say in being short. It does, it just doesn't bloat itself. The style of the movie actually creeps in over time, initially only starting in dream sequences, but then kind of creeping in into the background of Enid's everyday life, and culminating in the third act when the whole aspect ratio changes into 4:3, basically bringing her into a movie. One of those little background details is one that I really want to bring attention to because it's so small but kind of great. Prano even briefly brings it up in the commentary track with her cinematographer. There's a shot where Enid is with her family at a dinner table, and the background of the shot is a couple houses, and it just looks like a set backdrop, but apparently this was the real location that they shot the end of the film at. They just went outside of that real house and shot the reverse angle, which is kind of crazy how they made the real world look like a movie, which kind of comes back into the themes. And it really kind of messes with your perception of how this movie is going to be. I know, very meta, but that's something that I really kind of like, and it's something that I'm eventually going to get to as to why I think this movie's great. I really love this movie, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, so at this point, you probably should just go out and experience it for yourself. This movie does something very specific that I love. That's kind of like a twist, but it's not. It's kind of a take on a twist. Because your normal narrative twist mostly just comes down to keeping something from the audience that, when it's most effective, will come back and surprise them. And that's not really that satisfying, and subverting expectations in that way also isn't that difficult. Again, you're just not telling me something until it's the best time to tell me. What I'm talking about is when a filmmaker is so confident in what they're making that they know how you're going to react and then reflect that back in the filmmaking. I think the most famous example of this is probably Funny Games, in which the audience is incited into wanting violence that they are then made really uncomfortable by. And this movie does something very similar with The Missing Sister. The movie lures the audience into the same false optimism that Enid has, and if you are invested in that plotline, the movie won. Realistically, Enid has no reason to believe that the woman she saw was her sister, aside from the fact that she kinda looks like her, but 20 years older, and that the movie is similar to her fractured, repressed memories when she was a child. It's barely enough of a connection to be anything substantial. Her desire to fill that void overtakes her, and she ends up becoming the horror movie villain that she would otherwise have control over when she's editing films.
People think that I create horror. Horror is already out there in all of us.
There's a small plotline about how Enid is partially responsible for letting a film pass that contains a scene where someone eats someone else's face. This is then later done in real life, and so people blame the movie for this. However, there was a easily missed line about how the person had never seen the movie. This goes along with the monologue from Frederick North, the guy who directed the movie that Enid saw, as he talks about the horror having always been there, and that the real horror is just our trauma. The things that are reminding us of that trauma in movies bother us because we have problems. These things just remind us of it. This kind of comes back around to the scariest horror movies being the ones that stick with you. The ones that really remind you of the things that you're truly afraid of, or the ones that create the fears that you really get bothered by. That's scary. It's not a single event or thing that's scary. Scary is supposed to bother you. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, and you're not supposed to be okay with these things. I think that the biggest difference between these two kinds of twists can be seen in a rewatch. When you just keep something from your audience, it just becomes dramatic irony, something that they know about, but the characters don't. And you're just kind of waiting for that to happen. You can only leave hindsight clues or retrospective lines about it. It's nothing really concrete. But with this, it completely changes how you look at the movie. Where there once may be frustration with a character for not being supportive of Enid, you might now feel pity for her as she actually is being offered a lot of help and support, but completely rejects it because it's not what she wants. That learning experience, a funny games-esque lesson in the responsibility of filmmakers and their audience, is so well woven into the story, all without sacrificing its delivery and going full avant-garde, and keeping its narrative really concise. It's beautiful. I think it's a really smart, original script, and I love it. I would like to ask this movie out on a date.